Could ISIS take Misrata and thus control a major port on the Mediterranean?
Well, until recently, I'd have said no, because the Misrata militia, ever since 2011, and the way that the Libyan conflict has evolved, has been the strongest force, arguably, in the country. So I'd have said no. But then we look and actually say, well, the battling in Sirte that IS has under control is very substantial. Also, we know that IS in the jihadist heartland in the east around Derna and now the eastern neighbourhoods of Benghazi is extremely strong. So neither the main force in the centre of the country nor the main forces in the east, General Haftar and his allies, have been able to overcome them. So clearly the situation, they are gaining momentum in a very chaotic situation.
Very chaotic indeed. It's a bit blurry to us in terms of who are these fighters.
Well, it should be blurred, because what you have are a number of different factions. You have regional elements. Remember, in Libya, when we're talking about Misrata, we're talking about a port city, a militia whose main loyalty for a long time has been to the port. In the west, we had the Zintan militia. Who'd ever heard of Zintan before the revolution from the Jabal Nufusa? And we have others as well, apart from one of the national governments that's in Benghazi and people from the east. We have people down in the Fezzan, down in the south, and Tuareg groups who are also fighting their way. The fact is that Gaddafi created a state, he called it a Jamahiriya, that wasn't really a state. It was a one-man system that imploded, and ever since then, unity hasn't happened, and we keep on dividing and dividing and dividing. Now, that's something you always have in North African sociology. The interesting thing is that there are moments when those divisions come back, and as well as having fission, you can have fusion. So I think the most interesting thing at the moment is, amid the chaos and amid the disaster, can we get to a situation where some of the bigger, dare we say, more responsible and not IS forces in Libya can actually come together? The politics say it doesn't look likely, but the situation on the ground suggests that something has to happen, and that's certainly the country's best bet.
I was going to say, with ISIS visibly carving out a niche for itself there, how much is it concentrating the minds? We know the UN is supposed to come up with a new reconciliation plan by the end of the week that would bring it back to having one official government.
The UN is battling on against really difficult conditions. I mean, the fact is that neither the Tripoli government nor the Tobruk al-Baghdadi government wants to participate. But the fact is that there is, I think, a greater opportunity where it looked as if it was going to be a complete failure. It is possible amidst the chaos, but it's not a huge possibility, but it is possible that a deal could be struck, because, quite frankly, the level of the offensive being done by these jihadist groups who have joined the Islamic State franchise is so considerable that it should be enough to bring both sides together. But would, for example, the government and the factions in Tripoli accept a deal with General Haftar and the government in Tobruk? Well, that is still quite a long way off. The Tripoli Prime Minister today visited the scene of this weekend's bombing in Misrata and was saying, well, of course, these people say they're IS, but I'm really blaming General Haftar. So there's still a long way to go. It is a terrible situation.
You say jihadist groups who've joined the IS franchise. What do we know about these jihadists?
Well, we're talking in many cases about very long-standing groups. If you look at groups such as the Libyan Fighting Group, who were always in conflict with the Gaddafi regime. I remember Gaddafi actually bombed Derna back in the 1990s to overcome jihadist opponents. There have always been these groups in the area. When there was the revolution in 2011, I can remember coming over the Green Mountain to come into Benghazi while the fighting was going on. And it was very clear that the road that snaked off to Derna, to the east, was even then a no-go area. Derna was looking after itself, and it had a strong jihadist core. So what we're talking about, it's a chicken and egg situation, but what came first, the chicken and the egg? And undoubtedly, in this case, the egg which is Derna, it is jihadists, it is groups, and IS is the franchise. People have, as across the Middle East, picked up because it's a strong franchise. It has an ideology. People can look up to it, but I think and also it can provide support. So you're going to start to see foreign jihadis. We've seen reports that the IS leadership in Raqqa in Syria is very interested in seeing its jihadists come into Libya, come into the vacuum, and then possibly head into Europe from there. But the fact is that you're building on what was a very strong Islamist opposition to Gaddafi over decades, to the post-Gaddafi settlement, and now aligning itself with Islamic State. This isn't all a big import.
Which brings us back again to the question I asked you at the outset of our conversation, John. If there is this continued fighting and feuding between various factions in Libya, and you've spelled them out for us, can ISIS realistically control a port city on the Mediterranean?
It can, because it's shown that it can control land in Iraq. We've seen a situation where US-led bombing campaigns have had to come in. They haven't necessarily been successful, but they have degraded IS. Now, you could argue that if you were looking at a sort of Western logic, we'd turn around and say it is logical that the government in Tobruk, the government in Tripoli, and their allies are faced with an existential threat, that they should unite with each other, and possibly they should also call for international alliances. But that kind of logic has yet to work its way through in Libya. Libya remains extremely suspicious of external intervention, and it remains Libyan groups, starting from the family, but then coming out to the region and the city, remain extremely suspicious of groups that come from outside. And that biggest group is the Libyan nation. Libyans still fear Libyan, but they're very divided. And I don't think there's yet the impetus for those groups to come together, however hard the UN tries. But the point is that the UN, the Europeans and others, faced with a very difficult situation in which there are extreme limits to what kind of interventions we can do, apparently, still have to keep trying. And this is, as IS grows in strength, it is a great threat, but also possibly it could be an opportunity.
An opportunity to have a reconciliation. John Marks of Cross Border Information, many thanks for joining us.
Thank you.